We often think about elections, the campaigns, the voting day itself.
Right, the really visible parts.
But behind all that, there's something just as vital. Making sure the voter list itself is solid, accurate.
Absolutely. That foundation is crucial for the whole process to be fair and meaningful.
And that leads us right into our deep dive today, inclusion and exclusion proceedings. We're talking Philippine election law here.
It sounds a bit technical, maybe?
It can, but it's essentially the system for sorting out disputes about who actually gets to vote, who's legitimately on that list.
Exactly. It's how errors get fixed and how eligibility is formally confirmed or denied if there's a challenge.
So if you're listening, our goal is to help you get a good, quick grasp of this corner of election integrity. We'll be looking at the Omnibus Election Code.
The Voters Registration Act of 1996.
And Comelec rules, too. These are basically the rule books for this process.
They lay out the framework, the timelines, the grounds, everything needed to ensure it's done properly.
So our mission, let's say, is to understand how these legal steps ensure the voter lists in the Philippines stay accurate. Let's unpack it.
Okay.
So first off, what's the basic point? Why have these proceedings at all?
Well, it boils down to two key things. First, inclusion. Making absolutely sure that every qualified Filipino who should be on the list is on the list, protecting their right to vote.
Okay, getting people on.
And second, exclusion. Making sure people who aren't qualified under the law are removed, preventing ineligible voting. It's really about the integrity of the list itself.
Right, okay. So inclusion gets the right people in, exclusion keeps the wrong people out.
Yeah.
Kind of like managing the guest list for a really big, important party, yeah?
That's a good analogy, actually. You need everyone invited to be on the list, and you need to make sure no one crashes it who shouldn't be there.
Makes sense. It sounds like it could be a tricky balance, though, ensuring access but also preventing fraud.
Oh, absolutely. That's the inherent tension. You want the process accessible enough so legitimate voters aren't disenfranchised, but rigorous enough to weed out invalid registrations.
Gotcha. Okay, so who actually gets to kickstart these processes? Who can file a petition?
For inclusion, it's usually the person themselves. If your registration application gets denied by the Election Registration Board, or, if your name just isn't on the list when it should be, you can file.
Right, you're the one directly affected, so you take action. Makes sense. What about exclusion? Who can challenge someone else's registration?
That's a bit broader. Firstly, any registered voter living in the same city or municipality can file an exclusion petition against someone else on that same local list.
So like community oversight?
Sort of, yes. It empowers local citizens. Secondly, political parties, acting through their official representatives, can also file petitions.
Ah, okay. Parties get involved too.
And thirdly, the Election Registration Board itself can initiate exclusion if it finds evidence that someone was registered unlawfully in the first place.
Interesting. So you've got individuals, parties, and the official body all potentially involved in keeping the list clean. Now, where does this actually happen? Is it a big national court thing?
No, actually, it starts very local. These cases are filed and heard in the Municipal Trial Court, the MTC, or the Metropolitan Trial Court, MATC, depending on the location.
The MTC or METC right there in the city or municipality where the registration is questioned.
Exactly. It keeps the process close to the community involved and allows the court to potentially access local knowledge or evidence more easily.
That seems practical, easier for everyone involved, probably.
It generally is, yes. More accessible.
All right, let's get into the how, step by step. What happens when someone wants to file one of these petitions?
Okay, so the first step is filing that formal petition with the correct court, the MTC or METC. And timing is critical here.
Deadlines, right?
Yes. You have to file within 10 days after the Election Registration Board posts the preliminary voter list.
Yeah.
Or, alternatively, within 25 days after the very last day of voter registration, whichever date comes first.
10 days from posting or 25 from the end of registration, whichever is earlier. Wow, that's a tight window. People really need to be paying attention.
They absolutely do. There's not a lot of time to waste if you see an issue.
So what needs to go in that petition? You can't just say, add this person or remove that person, right?
No, definitely not. It needs to be specific. You need the petitioner's full name and address. Crucially, you must clearly state the reasons, the grounds for inclusion or exclusion, like the factual basis.
Okay, the why.
Exactly. And if you have witnesses who can back up your claims, you need to include their full names and addresses too.
Got it. Details and evidence are key. So, petition filed. What happens next? Does the person being challenged just get kicked off the list?
Oh no, due process is vital. In exclusion cases, the person whose registration is being challenged must be notified. They get a formal notice at least 5 days before the court hearing.
5 days notice. Okay.
Yes, that gives them a chance to prepare their response, gather their own evidence, and argue their case. And for transparency, the court also notifies the local election officer.
And the election officer does what?
They have to post a notice about the petition on the public bulletin board at the local election office, so the community is aware proceedings are happening.
Okay, so notification for the person involved and public notice too. Now, you mentioned timing is tight. Does the court case itself drag on?
No, these are designed to be fast. They're called summary proceedings. The law actually requires the court to decide the case within 15 days from when the petition was filed.
15 days. Wow. That is remarkably quick for a legal process.
It is. It underscores the need to finalize that voter list before Election Day.
Makes sense. What if someone doesn't agree with the MTC or METC decision? Is that it? Game over?
Not necessarily. There's one level of appeal possible. The dissatisfied party can appeal to the Regional Trial Court, the RTC.
Okay. The RTC. Is there a deadline for that too?
Yep, another quick one. You only have 5 days from the date the MTC or MinTC decision was made to file your appeal with the RTC.
5 days. Okay.
And the RTC also has to act fast. It's required to decide the appeal within 10 days of receiving it.
10 days for the appeal decision. So quick initial ruling, even quicker appeal. And is the RTC decision usually the final word?
Generally, yes. For these specific exclusion cases, the decision of the RTC is typically final and immediately executory. It settles the matter.
Right. So the system prioritizes speed and finality to get that voter list ready. Okay, let's dig into the why. What are the actual legal reasons someone might be included or excluded?
For inclusion, it's pretty straightforward. Usually it's because you were a qualified voter, you meet all the requirements, but your name was mistakenly left off the list, or maybe your registration application was wrongly denied by the board.
So correcting errors, basically, making sure qualified people aren't missed.
Yeah, exactly. Now, exclusion, that involves looking at the disqualifications.
Okay, what disqualifies someone? This must tie into the Constitution, right?
Yeah, precisely. Article V, Section 1 of the Constitution sets the basics. So, grounds for exclusion include not meeting the age requirement being under 18.
Right.
Not being a Filipino citizen.
Obvious one.
Not meeting the residency requirement you need to have lived in that specific city or municipality for at least 6 months right before the election.
6 months local residency. Okay.
And there are disqualifications based on law. For instance, if you've been convicted of a crime with a final judgment carrying a sentence of more than 1 year in prison, unless you've had your voting rights restored, like through amnesty.
Okay. Serious criminal convictions.
Also, if someone has been legally declared insane or incompetent by a competent authority.
What's the thinking behind those exclusions, like the criminal conviction one?
Well, the rationale often revolves around civic responsibility and historically the idea that certain serious crimes demonstrate a lack of fitness to participate in governance, though debates exist around disenfranchisement. For incompetence, it's about the capacity to make an informed choice.
I see. Are there other common reasons for exclusion?
Yes. A big one is transferring residence. If you've permanently moved to a different city or municipality, you're no longer eligible to vote in your old one. You need to re-register in your new location.
Makes sense. You vote where you live.
And finally, a really important one. If your registration was obtained illegally, through fraud, misrepresentation, maybe providing false information, that's grounds for removal.
So the registration itself has to be legitimate, not just meeting the criteria, but getting on the list properly.
Exactly. It protects against manipulating the rolls.
So once the court, MTC, MinTC, or the RTC on appeal makes its final decision, what happens immediately?
The effect is direct. If the court orders inclusion, the Election Registration Board must add that person's name to the official voter list right away.
Okay.
If the court orders exclusion, the board must remove or strike off that person's name from the list.
So the court order directly changes the official list used for the election.
Correct. Those decisions shape the final certified list of voters.
Now, you mentioned legal precedents earlier. Are there some key court cases that have really shaped how these rules work in practice?
Yes, a few are quite significant. Abubakar v. Kamalek from 2000 is a big one. The Supreme Court really hammered home the importance of due process.
Due process, meaning fairness.
Exactly. Making sure the person being challenged gets proper notice, enough time, and a real chance to be heard before their name is potentially removed. fairness is paramount.
Can't just take away the right to vote lightly. What's another example?
Aquino v. Kamalik in 2010. That case really focused on the substance of the requirements, like residency and citizenship. The court said it's not enough to just claim you meet them. You need solid proof.
So show, don't just tell. Evidence matters.
Precisely. It reinforces that these are real, factual requirements.
And what about Pinheiro v. Kamalik from 2009? You mentioned that adds nuance.
Right. Pinheiro clarified something interesting about residency. The court ruled that just because someone files a certificate of candidacy to run for office in Place A, it doesn't automatically mean they've abandoned their voting residence in Place B.
Ah, okay.
You might run for office somewhere for political reasons, but still legally reside, and therefore vote, somewhere else. It separated the act of candidacy from the legal definition of residence for voting.
That's an important distinction. Running for office isn't the same as moving house, necessarily. Interesting. Okay, bringing this all back to the listener, why should you listening now care about these, kind of technical legal procedures?
Because they're fundamental to democracy. Seriously.
Yeah.
These inclusion and exclusion rules are the legal backbone ensuring that your vote and everyone else's valid vote counts fairly. They're how we try to prevent fraud and make sure election results actually reflect the will of the eligible voters.
Right. It's not just bureaucracy. It's about protecting the integrity of the whole election, making sure it's legitimate.
Absolutely. Without these checks and balances, the system could be much more vulnerable to manipulation, and the principle of one qualified person, one vote, could be undermined.
So, wrapping this up, what's the main thing we should take away from this deep dive?
I'd say the key takeaway is that these inclusion and exclusion proceedings are vital, court-supervised mechanisms in the Philippines designed specifically to keep the voter list accurate and fair. They are essential for electoral integrity.
And it all rests on that legal framework. The Omnibus Election Code, the Voters Registration Act, Kamalik rules, with the courts playing that crucial enforcement role.
Exactly. It's a system designed to safeguard the ballot.
So here's something to think about as we finish. How do these Philippine processes compare to voter list management in other countries you might know about? And maybe more importantly, what could happen if rules like these and the courts to back them up just weren't there?
That's a sobering thought.
Definitely food for thought. It really highlights why every part of the election process, even the parts we don't often see, matters so much for a fair outcome.